They're getting ready to do something big. This is a setup if I ever seen one. This is your Day X World War III emergency alert. So Volodymyr Zelensky gets up in front of the UN General Assembly today, right? And he makes an incredibly provocative statement. He is claiming in his accusations against Russia that they are getting ready to target Ukraine's nuclear power plants, to blow them up. Yes, you heard correct. Volodymyr Zelensky had the audacity to patronize the audience of, I presume, astute politicians and diplomats, that Russia, for some reason, is going to start blowing up Ukraine's nuclear power plants. Now, while it's true that this is a forum where people can go on long-winded diatribes against their opponents and filibuster for 3 or 4 hours, it's not that typical that they disclose this type of sensitive intelligence information on that type of forum. Like, it's just not something you do, okay? So clearly, this is a setup. They're getting ready to do something crazy in order to try to win the hearts and minds back of the West, who, of course, is waning in their support for this conflict. Now, they've also been given the green light to use long-range weapons. Biden has provided them with more weapons. They haven't officially been given the green light to utilize Storm Shadows and long-range JASSMs missiles and ATACMS deep inside Russia yet. But the word on the street from very reputable sources is that the decision has already been made to green light deep strikes into Russian territory. It's going to be covert, and the first time we're going to hear about it is after it happens. Now, why is this important? If you watched the video yesterday, I broke down the new Russian nuclear doctrine, which basically states that if a non-nuclear, even if it's a non-nuclear country, and even if they're only targeting us with conventional weaponry like drones, we reserve the right to use nuclear weapons. And I told you why I thought that this update to their nuclear doctrine was a terrible idea. For one, it gives Ukraine the exact blueprints for how to provoke the Russians. And if the Russians don't respond, then that means that the red lines are bullshit, and NATO will continue to push until they push back. That's how it's going to be. NATO will only respond to a physical pushback. Russia can talk all they want. They can update the nuclear doctrine. That's not going to change a thing. Because what all the Russia bros need to understand is that were it that simple, I mean, really think about this for a second. If it was that simple that all Putin had to do was come out and say, hey, if you invade Kursk, or if you don't leave Kursk immediately, or if you continue to bomb our ammunition depots, or if you continue to fight back in any way at all, we're just going to nuke you. If it was that simple, then he would have done it a long time ago. So understand, he knows it's not going to work. This is a last-ditch attempt because he knows they're now getting backed into a corner in more ways than one. And he knows that the decision has been made to do deep strikes inside Russia, and he's putting people on notice that once this UN General Assembly concludes, and that's when you're going to have a massive drone strike by the Ukrainians, because you'll notice that since this event began about a week ago, there hasn't been any drone strikes. After those big hits that Russia took at their ammunition dumps, Ukraine hasn't done a whole lot. Now, of course, they don't have an infinite amount of these vehicles, so I'm presuming that they are amassing them for another big attack, because they like to throw as many as they can at the Russians, because they know that the Russians have formidable air defense and they can shoot down quite a few of these things. So in order to do any damage, you got to send a crap load. But I think what they're going to do is they're going to do a coordinated strike, not only using drones, but also with these long-range weapon systems at the same time, knowing full well that there's a good possibility that Russia actually won't use a nuclear weapon immediately, but there'll be some other escalatory action which is taken. Now, getting back to this nuclear power plant thing, because if and when that goes sideways, they now have a fallback plan. They're planting the seeds in an incredibly patronizing manner. Nobody with 2 brain cells who is not just on the take or being completely disingenuous, or maybe is just that brainwashed, can genuinely believe that the Russians have any interest right now in targeting Ukraine's nuclear power plant. Like, it just makes no sense. There are 2 scenarios that they're going to say, well, maybe it does make sense. From the Russians' point of view, the only way it would make sense to target these nuclear power facilities is if there was something so sensitive at these facilities that are being shielded by these facilities, like a human shield, but a nuclear shield, because they know you can store stuff there. I'm talking about weapons, possibly weapons of mass destruction. Maybe then they would do it, because that'd be the only way the juice would be worth the squeeze. They'd lose the international PR game miserably. And in addition to that, there would be massive blowback effects on Belarus and NATO, and it would likely be grounds to trigger Article 5, because NATO has explicitly stated that if there is a radioactive debris cloud caused by either a nuclear bomb or an attack on a nuclear facility as a result of Russian bombardment of Ukraine, that would be grounds to trigger Article 4 and Article 5, which means that NATO would effectively be at war with Russia. We would be in a state of DEFCON 2, and, they would probably just say everything was fine in the media, and as they're saying now, which of course it isn't. We're closer to nuclear war than ever before. And I would say we're about 5 times closer to nuclear war than we were last week when we were closer to nuclear war than ever before. So there really is no good reason. Now, the Ukrainians are going to say, well, they're going to do this because they want to put us in the dark for winter. The Russians have gutted Ukraine's power grid infrastructure, the non-nuclear stuff, but in the last few years, the Europeans have experienced an incredibly mild winter. And of course, this has allowed Ukraine to endure throughout that time. There's no reason to think that it won't be the same, because it was an incredibly above average temperature summer in most of Europe. And that seems to be the trend nowadays, for reasons that we're not going to get into, because once again, it's a contentious issue, but it's just science. So anyways, what we need to talk about, though, is the censorship that is going to arise, because this is a setup. We know it's a setup. We know they're dumb enough to try it, and they're going to do it. Now, the problem is you're not going to be able to call it as such without getting deplatformed, demonetized, shadow banned, subject to various types of lawfare if you do call it for what it is when it does go down. Okay? And so I'm putting it out there ahead of time that I suspect that this is so blatantly obvious what they're getting ready to cook up here, that I'm going to be very suspicious when it happens. But, I may be reserved in my statements about it when it does happen, because, if you know that your adversary is a bear, are you going to poke the bear when you know that you're just going to get mauled? It's like a lot of these influencers, they talk a bunch of shit, and then they wonder why they get canceled and deplatformed. It's like, you should have been more strategic. You could have been more strategic. It's like, you don't, if you're a little country and you don't even have, your own arms industry yet, and you're going up against like the United States military, maybe not a good idea. You might want to just, play your cards right, bide your time for a little bit, develop a little bit more, right? Kind of like what Japan is doing right now, or has been trying to do to get out under the boot heel of the United States for the last 70, 80 years. So you don't want to just throw yourself under the bus. Now, unfortunately, dozens, and I have a list of names of dozens of individuals who have, unfortunately, been censored. I say unfortunately, but I don't agree with a lot of things these people say. And I want to make this abundantly clear that this is not in any way an endorsement for these people. Okay, some of them, I agree with some things and I don't agree with others. Some I think are just court jesters for Gen Z and are doing their part to actually brainwash the population, but there's still a component of them which is a dissident voice, so I respect that. I want these people to have free speech, and it's not just people, it's media agencies. There's an iron curtain that cuts across our own country as well. I'm going to name these names. I'm sure you've heard of many of them. And this list has grown immensely in just the last few weeks. And it's concerning because I've always stated that before World War III, before the shit hits the fan, they need to make sure that everybody's going to play ball, that everybody's on board, because the last thing they need is a liability in that situation, somebody saying something that mirrors the truth in that situation. Candace Owens, Russell Brand, Russia Today, the news agency, RIA Novosti, Sputnik, Al Mayadeen, which is a Lebanese media agency, Press TV, Al Jazeera, who recently had their offices shut down in the West Bank, Scott Ritter, Andrew and Tristan Tate, Sneeko. Yes, I put Sneeko on this. I know. I probably shouldn't have, but, you know, I mean, he's one of those guys who's a dissonant voice, I guess. He says some things that are a little edgy and, you know, maybe somebody they can't control. Inside Russia, who's actually a Russian, but I don't think he lives in Russia, but he's actually critical, very critical of the Russian government, very aligned with the whole NAFO crowd. He got demonetized because most Russian YouTubers, I think, have been demonetized just by virtue of the fact that they're Russian. Pavel Durov, the owner of Telegram, who basically got locked up, agreed to play ball with the elites, and they let him go. Basically now anybody who uses that app, they can have access to the things that you're saying on it. Because of course, this is crunch time. And again, you would not do this. You would not build up a list of people like this that you were censoring if you thought that things were cooling down and if you were past it. Tucker Carlson, Kanye West. Yes, crazy Kanye. But you know one thing we'll say about crazy Kanye is I don't think he's associated with that P. Diddy business. So, I mean, say what you want. There's something to be said about that. Alex Jones. You know, in reading this list, I'm going to trigger so many bad parts of the algorithm, but I mean, at this point, who cares? Lauren Chen, Mark Sloboda, DD Geopolitics. Again, these are all people who've been either demonetized, canceled completely, have had their channel shut down. Okay. And again, I don't agree with all of them. I'm just saying, just so you know what's happening. Kim.com, who's gone very silent for probably 3 or 4 weeks. The last time I talked to him in a DM was probably, I don't know, a couple months ago, but I haven't heard from him at all on Twitter in several weeks, which is weird for him because he's usually tweeting every day. Again, don't agree with everything that guy says. Fresh and Fit, Myron Gaines of Fresh and Fit, Brett Weinstein, Paul Joseph Watson, Jackson Hinkle, The Gray Zone, George Gammon. I think he's had a few, he's really probably shouldn't even be on this list, but he's had a couple videos demonetized because of, I don't know, he said one bad word. So really he shouldn't even be on this list, but I figured I'd throw it on there because he is still, you know, he knows what time it is. Rafi Farber, which is right now, he is currently off of X because he's taking a little hiatus because unfortunately his country's in a state of war. The late Gonzalo Lira. Yes, the late unfortunate Gonzalo Lira. Tim Pool, Angelo Giuliano, very popular on other social media platforms. Gerald Celente, Luke Rudowski, Steven Crowder, Destiny, as Jesse Lee Peterson would say. How do you pronounce her name? Michaela Peterson, Pearl Davis, Dom DeLucre, Richard Medhurst, Bassem Youssef, and Syrian Girl, to name a few. To name a few. Boy, they are getting scared, man. They are getting real scared. They're about to do some crazy shit. You know, on Wikipedia, they're trying to say that we're only at DEFCON 3. Maybe that's right, but that means that the Air Force can be prepared relatively quickly. Still might take, you know, a day or so, but that means, you know, we're not too far. That's a far cry from DEFCON 5. And I'd say we're somewhere in between DEFCON 3 and 2, especially in light of these recent comments by the Russian government. Now, I must warn you guys that there's a thing called not only bots, but there are people in India. I mean, you can get them to do it on Fiverr. You can get people to, there's videos of people in various, usually Asian countries, not only Asian countries, but they have this array of like 50 phones and they're commenting and they're running like 50 different types of accounts. There's something in social psychology called consensus validity. Consensus validity. It's the basis, it's the principle behind things like laugh tracks. You know, when you watch the old sitcoms and you kind of have to be queued up to tell something is funny and it makes it seem funnier when maybe it even isn't. Well, consensus validity is the idea that if more people believe something, then you will be more likely to believe it because you think, well, a lot of people are believing this, it must be true. It's kind of a conformist principle, right? Well, it's important to understand that there's a lot of bots, okay? There's a lot of bots, and there's probably a lot of counterintelligence agents right now in these communities who are acting as though they're like these authentic influencers, grassroots influencers, but they have a very unique way of speaking, and it's very patronizing, and usually there's no real, there's not a lot of unique observations in analysis. Oftentimes it's just parroting one generic political platform, and usually it is perfectly in line with whatever one of the warmongers is saying, whether it's pro-Israel or pro-Ukraine. And so just be very careful of these. One of them recently got busted on X. This was a guy who, he made this claim. Okay, this is a guy in India now, okay? And here is one of his tweets. He says, I am having to constantly run to the nearest bomb shelter with my family, which is not to make light of this incident, but just this is important because this is fraud. Okay, this is a guy pretending that he's in Israel, all right? And he says, I'm having to constantly run to the nearest bomb shelter with my family. This is not a game. It's now part of our life and our reality. I refuse for our children to grow up living in hell. Hezbollah will be destroyed. Okay, so if you were an Israeli person and you had that sentiment, that's your opinion. You're totally entitled to have that. Unfortunately, there was a community note on this post, and it said the following. Readers added context they thought people might want to know. This user is notorious for creating clickbait content and seeking high levels of engagement. User resides in the slums. I don't think they needed to write that, but it's not the most, you know, it's not the most professional thing to say for a community note. Nonetheless, resides in the slums of Mebulapur, Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh, India, and is not in Israel. So, I don't know. I mean, you just got to understand that there is an information war going on. I'll give one thing to Alex Jones, that info war word that he created. It's a great word because this really is an information war. And all I'm saying that between now and around the election, we're about to see a major flashbulb event. And if you question it, you're going to be likely delisted or shadow banned even more than we already are. If you want to support this channel, guys, go check out CanadianPreparedness.com. We are an honest Canadian business trying to get you quality preparedness items. We try to show you here on the channel educational stuff. I don't have to do that. I could just come on here and do these videos from the car every day. But for me, I feel I'd be doing you a disservice. Today we're almost done. We're like 85% done installing this massive solar system. And I'm so excited to now officially say that I'm nearly completely off grid. And I use air quotes because you're never really off grid. You know, there's so many moving parts and things that break down, and you're always going to be reliant on people outside your little sphere of influence. But nonetheless, I can officially say that within the next 48 hours, I will be purely powered just by the sun. And I would encourage you to endeavor to do something similar if and when it is a possibility for you. So just keep on grinding, keep on working hard. Carpe diem, seize the day. I will see you later on today, and we'll do our usual audio, visual, theatrics, and illustrations and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.